suggests is that for a better picture, you know, of the student's real ability, and also for full comprehension of the process, the test taker should also have some form of extensive listening. You know? Okay, and that may include, that always will include the integration with speaking, and if possible, or when possible, with other skills. For example, like somebody mentioned, maybe they listen to something, and then in response they write something, no? And so you are integrating listening with some writing, no? So, something like that, no? Yeah. So, okay, can you please, Abby, display this document on the screen? Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Okay, and so right after this, at the beginning of page 121, we have at the next page, micro and macro skills of listening. Can we do that? Mm-hmm.
Yes, prof.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and so when you think about all this intricate system or process that listening is, it's maybe much more comprehensible if you divide it, if you classify it in these two groups, micro and macro skills of listening. And that's what the author says. Now, a useful way of synthesizing the lists above in the previous page is to consider a finite number of micro and macro skills. No. Okay, and for this purpose, you are presented here with Richard's list, no, which has proven to be effective, no, in the domain of specifying objectives for learning. And so the benefit of using this is that, for example, teachers can know exactly what the students need at each level of their learning process. It makes here this clarification. Micro skills are those that attend to the smaller bits and chunks of language, the smaller bits. And so it's more like a bottom-up process. And macro skills focus more on the larger elements involved in a top-down approach to a listening task. So in total, micro and macro skills, they total 17 objectives to assess listening, which are then presented in the next table. No? So 11 micro skills and 6 macro skills. Macro skills. Yeah, and so you, depending on the level of your students, well, you can choose a few. Well, you have a great, you have a wide choice here of skills that you have to put to the test. So, for example, here you have discriminate among the sounds of English, retain chunks of language, recognize patterns, recognize contractions, reduced forms of words, etc. No? Well, this is for you to read and analyze in your free time. For as for the micro skills, we have recognize the communicative functions of utterances according to situations, participants, goals, etc. Then infer situations, participants, goals using real-world knowledge. And then you have from events, ideas, and other types, describe, predict outcomes, infer links and connections between events, deduce causes and effects, and detect such relations as main idea, supporting idea, and information, etc. So more like the top-down process, no? Micro skills have to do more with extensive listening, no? Right. Okay. Well, so you need to read this now, of course, in your free time, or at least you need to have the table with you, no, somewhere that you can easily access whenever you. Yeah. Can we go to the next page here? Scroll down. Right. Yeah. Implied. Yeah. Can we go to this next page here on the right? Exactly. Implied in the taxonomy above. Yeah. And so, well, if you look at the chart, like it's 17. No, 17 is a lot. It's a lot. And so, this kind of chart is the taxonomy, no? The taxonomy. And as you can see, this portrays why English listening, no? The process of assessing listening is so difficult, no? Because it's not simply a linear process, no? So it's not that because you see one lesson after lesson and after lesson, it means that your listening skills improve, no? Right. Okay. Well, so if we can, well, you need to read this paragraph here. We're going to have someone, please, can we have a volunteer to read this section? Implied in the taxonomy above.
Implied in the taxonomy above is a notion of what makes many aspects of listening difficult, or why listening is not simply a linear process of recording strings of language as they are transmitted into our brains. Developing a sense of which aspects of listening performance are predictably difficult will help you to challenge your students appropriately and to assign weights to items. Consider the following list of what makes listening difficult.
Great.
Number one, should I continue? Or?
Yeah. No, okay. But first, yeah, please, just a second. Yeah. Okay. So the purpose of learning about the taxonomy and learning about the micro and macro skills is that you propose some challenge for the students, and of course, as the book says here, assign weights to items. So in other words, you can make it a little more or less difficult depending on the level of the students. Yeah. And so what makes listening so difficult? No, here's a long list of what makes language listening especially difficult. Clustering. No, what is the meaning of clustering? What's the meaning of cluster? Any idea what clustering means? Yes.
According to the information, clustering is attending to appropriate chunks of language, phrases, clauses, and constituent.
Yeah, but remember that the list that is given here is the list of problems that we have in developing the listening skill. No? And one problem is clustering. So clustering means that something is full of things. No? Clustering means that, for example, you can say that a room is clustered when you have too much furniture. No? For example, in your bedroom, you have a huge bed, and then you have a big sofa, and then a big bookshelf, and then you have no room for you, no? So clustered means that it's full of things. In English, in listening, it means that it's full of distractions, because sometimes you listen to, in listening, you have to listen to a 5-minute recording or video, but you have to pay attention only to some specific things. The rest is distractions. The rest is clustering for you. And especially, I mean, if you're in the intermediate level, if you are, well, as it's our case, that if you are a student of English as another language, then when someone gives you this exercise, you have to watch a video and then answer 2 questions. You have so much information, distractors. That's a cluster. Another problem is a redundancy. Because so people, for example, all through the video or the recording, they paraphrase things, they rephrase. There are repetitions with different forms of the language, elaborations, insertions. And so that makes it difficult. It's different when you take a piece of, if you take an article and read it, okay, you don't have the person talking in front of you, so it's much more comprehensible, because you read the text. But when the person is speaking, they begin to hesitate, they begin to make some pauses, then they rephrase, they change the tone, and so all those things make listening difficult. Then we have reduced forms, so all these contractions, things that people don't say, don't pronounce. Then you have performance variables, so being able to weed out hesitations, that's also a performance variables. When people begin to hesitate, and then they use these false starts and pauses and corrections in natural speech. So all these things make it very difficult, because they distract you from what the person is really meaning to say. Then you have colloquial language, idioms, slang, reduced forms, etc. Then you have the rate of delivery, so the speed, the speed at which the message is delivered, processing automatically as the speaker continues, because you can ask, if you're listening to a recording, you can ask the person to stop. It's different. Maybe if you're in person, you can say, please, can you say that again? Or you can say, please, can you speak a little more slowly? Can you repeat the last part or something? But if you're watching a movie or doing an exam, you can't. And yet, you have to focus on that. Then you have a stress, rhythm, intonation, correctly understanding prosodic elements of a spoken language, which is almost always much more difficult than understanding the smaller phonological bits and pieces. So rhythm, intonation, it's usually more difficult. And lastly, we have interaction. That's when you are responding. So managing the interactive flow of the language, from listening, I mean, you listen to the person, and then speaking, and then listening again to what the person has to say next. And so keeping this interaction can be also somewhat difficult, if you're doing an interaction, of course. Okay, so with all this information, with all this information, all these items that we've just read, with all the difficulties that listening implies, I ask you guys, how do you make your assessment? No, how do you design the assessment task in the listening part? What is more important for you? What considerations do you make? What do you take into account? What kind of exercises do you promote more? Please.
Prof,
Yes.
in my opinion, so I don't know if I am right or wrong. I consider that we need to know what is the level of our students before before preparing any kind of test.
Of
After
course, yeah.
that, we need to have a clear idea about, for example, the objectives
The
that
objectives, yeah, good. You
objectives that we want to achieve in that course, because in some cases, for example, I consider that for speaking, speaking, right?
listening. No?
For listening, we need to know what is the main objective at the end of the course, because in that way we can prepare a right or an evaluation according to that objective. And most important is to know what is the knowledge or what is the information that we have provide to our students, because it is necessary evaluate according to what we have taught. So I consider those kind of things, the level of the course
The real level.
and the objectives.
The objectives. The objectives. Yeah. Great. Yeah, the level. Yeah. Thank you very much. No? Yeah, of course. No, the objectives are our starting point. No? Great. Then we have to be realistic with the real level, of course. No? And design activities that you know that the average student in class should be able to do, no? Of course. Yeah, great. Yeah. So, well, what that leads us to our next section here, which is designing tests, no? Designing assessment tasks for this part that is intensive listening. Remember that we're going to try to include intensive, extensive, and at some point also later responsive, no? And selective also, no? All forms for a better, to have a better indicator of the real level of ability, no? Right. Okay, so in this section, the author explains that they're going to see intensive performance, no? And then he's going to propose extensive comprehension of the language in communicative contexts. No? So let's begin on the next page with on page 123, the next page, for an example of items that you can include. No? For example, the first one is recognizing phonological and morphological elements, no? Para un nivel más básico, no? So as you can see here, it says a typical form of intensive listening at this level is the recognition of phonological and morphological elements of language. A classic test task gives a spoken stimulus and asks students to identify the stimulus from two or more choices, as in the following example. So you can use your voice, no, or if you have a recording, if this is in recorded somewhere, you can use that. For example, the typical, he's from California, and the students have option A or B. No? So they have to recognize and distinguish he from she, no? in the contraction. No? Another example could be phonemic per vowels. No? For example, you say, or you, or the recording, the speaker says, is he living? The student has two options. No? Is he leaving or is he living? And so students have to recognize these elements, these linguistic elements. No? In both cases, no, above, minimal phonemic distinctions are the target. If you're testing recognition of morphology, you can use the same format. No? For example, for morphological pair, you can have, for example, I missed you very much. And then you have the present, I miss you very much. The students should be able to distinguish, no? If the sentence is in present, no, I miss you, or in the past, I missed you. I missed you. Yeah, can we scroll down?
Prof.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can.
Now, yeah, sorry, I was talking. I didn't realize that I was muted. Yeah. So so here's another example. No, for example, for the pattern can't. The author, I mean, the speaker says, my girlfriend can't go to the party. You have to discern, no, if this sentence is affirmative or negative, no, can't or can go to the party. Usually, the sound, if in a normal conversation, if there's no more context, basically the sound is very similar. So it's a good idea, no, for maybe for more advanced levels to discriminate the sound can or can't. And so if we can scroll down a little bit here and go to page 124, no? Yeah, and so we have this, no, because here in the can we scroll down? Oh, yeah, it's up to the right. Yeah, because these are the decontextualized. These kind of tasks leave something to be desired in their authenticity. So, well, that would be the problem. They're not really authentic tasks, but they are a step better than items that simply provide a that they simply provide a one-word stimulus. No? So at least it's better if you have a sentence, no, than if you have only one word. No? One word. Yeah, the next one is a paraphrase recognition. No? Paraphrase recognition. The next step on the scale of listening comprehension microskills is words, phrases, and sentences, which are frequently assessed by providing a stimulus sentence and asking the test taker to choose the correct paraphrase from a number of choices. So for example, this is a little more elaborated. No? So the person says, for example, hi, hello, my name is Keiko, I come from Japan. And so if the person understood the sentence, then they should be able to choose from these options the sentence that is correct. No, for example, here Keiko is Japanese. No, Japanese. Yeah. So, for example, here what you are testing is the knowledge of the word of the phrase "come from." No. So to add a little context, you have a conversation that can be a stimulus task to which test takers must respond with the correct paraphrase. Of course, in this type of sentence, in general, in this type of assessment items or assessment tasks, you have to be very careful that you're not testing other elements. Elements other than listening. Probably you can test, for example, the meaning of a word, right? For example, here, come from. No? But be careful that not to include items where they have to know 3 or 4 different expressions. No? Because in that case, you are testing the lexical components. No? You're not testing listening. No? So be careful. No? Be careful. Mm-hmm. Or for example, also when you are typing, when you're writing the items, consider the real level of the students. No? So for example, in the original dialogue, don't include, for example, slang or idiomatic expression if they are in level 1, because when they hear this idiomatic expression, then they get lost. No? They don't understand the rest of the sentence, and so it's not fair. No? Because you're not testing the knowledge of these lexical components, but you're testing listening. No? Right. Then you have this dialogue paraphrase. If we can scroll down a little bit. For example, you have this conversation. No? Hi, Maria. My name is George, blah, blah, blah. And the test taker reads this. No? George lives in the US, he's American, Canada, etc. And so on. You have all this information in the conversation. You have to choose the correct paraphrase. No? So here the criterion is recognition of the adjective form used to indicate country or origin. For example, the adjective Canadian, American, Brazilian, or Italian. So as you can see, sometimes in this type of items, the sentences have a component, some lexical components, that you have to be sure that the students already know. Mm-hmm. Great. Then you have examples. If we go to the next page. Then we have assignment tasks for responsive listening. No? Responsive listening. So a question and answer format can provide some interactivity in these lower end listening tasks. No? Lower end. The test taker's response is the appropriate answer to a question. Mm-hmm. So here, well, it's a little more elaborated, because students have to know the lexical component, and they have to know also the main elements of communication. No? I mean, they need to know what is a question, a command. For example, how much time did you take to do your homework? The answer should be about an hour. No? Yeah. Something like this. So in this kind of item, the objective is recognition of the WH questions, how much, and the appropriate response. Distractors are chosen to represent common learner errors. That's important, that when you elaborate the assessment, you should try and use distractors from that are real in class. No, if you observe that, for example, for a week you've been working on distinguishing when and where, and students confuse when and where, so you put this in. I mean, you work in class, you practice in class, and then you repeat it in the assessment. No? You put when and where, and you put similar phrases. No, one answering when and one answering where, so that the students work on the difficulties that they have experienced in class. No? So that way it's more valid. No, it's more valid. No? Right. So distractors are chosen from what happens in class. No, for example, how much versus how much longer, confusing how much when it's money, when it's time. No? Confusing a WH question with a yes/no question, that also can happen. So none of the tasks so far discussed have to be framed in a multiple choice format. They can be offered in a more open-ended framework in which test takers write or speak the response. The above item would then look like this. No? Yeah. So if you don't want to have the typical ABCD, which is maybe the most practical, but you can have this other format. No? The question is, how much time did you take? And the student has to write something in response. Time, ¿no? For example, 20 minutes, 1 hour, etc. Entonces ahí se convierte en an open-ended response. ¿No? Open-ended response formats gain a small amount of authenticity and creativity. They, of course, suffer some in their practicality, because you as teachers have to read all the students' responses and then judge the appropriateness of them. Because, well, then if you have, for example, a class with 50 students, right, and you ask this question, and then maybe you get answers of 1 line, 1 word, 1 paragraph. Imagine, you have to read all of them. Yes. And then your judgment, no? Maybe they wrote 1 paragraph, but 1 paragraph that has nothing to do with the question, so it's wrong, right? And so, well, you can make it maybe more, you can give them, you can specify in the tag, in the assessment, that it's 1 word, no? 1 or 2 words, or you mention well, something, no? You give them maybe the first letter or the last letter or the number of letters or something. No? And now for selective listening, no? Designing so the selective listening. Okay, then a third type of listening performance is selective listening, in which the test taker listens to a limited quantity of oral input and must discern within it some specific information. A number of techniques can be used that require selective listening. One could be, for example, listening close. No? Remember, the close means that you're going to use 1 word that you think is the most appropriate. No? Usually, if you are very careful, for example, in grammar, the answer is usually 1. No? There's only 1 possible answer. But if students are creative, no? If they know a synonym, maybe you can have a synonymous answer. No? But you have to use your best judgment. No? So examples of listening close tasks, sometimes called closed dictations or partial dictations, require that the test taker to listen a story, monologue, or conversation, and simultaneously read the written text in which selected words or phrases have been deleted. So it's like what you do when you have a song, no? You write all the words of the song. The students listen to the song, but you have deleted maybe 10 words. So students listen once or twice, and then they have to decide what to write in the blank, no? Although it's more commonly used with reading, no? But it generically, no, in forma genérica, but you can adapt it for listening. Yeah, so can we scroll down a little bit here?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so Abby, I don't know how much time do we have before I
Yes.
maybe start
Less than a
talking
minute.
about something. Less than 1 minute. Well,
Yes.
then I suggest that you guys read the missing pages, the remaining pages. You have to see examples of all examples of selective and then extensive, right? And any further comments or information from the author. Okay. And so in the next class, in the first 15 minutes, we will be talking. I will be asking about what you understood, what examples you saw, what items you found more useful. Okay, and maybe you can tell me something about your experience, you know, when you've created your own listening items, no? If you use this information or how